Supply chain. So what are typical supply chain green optimization solutions? What does it mean? I come from Amsterdam today to Venlo by car.
Did you really? That's not very great.
This is like the essence on what I want to discuss with you today. It's on how to improve supply chain performance. So this can be network design and optimization. For example, how do I decide where to put a warehouse? Or UGI Think Green. Does anyone know how many greenhouse gases there are? Radiation into the air, water evaporates, comes down as rain. It's a natural cycle. So water is a greenhouse gas, but doesn't affect our climate. However, CO2 really affects our climate. And you can see here this 56% is how much CO2 affects climate change. However, CO2 is not the biggest contributor to global warming in itself. Gases like, let's say, sulfur hexafluoride have a much bigger potential to warm the earth for global warming, as you can see here. However, because their concentration in the air is so little, their overall effect is much less. And you've probably heard about something called CO2 equivalent, which is all the other gases taken into account, but put into the CO2 perspective. So what they're doing when they're talking about CO2 equivalent is they take the amount of CO2 in the air plus the amount of, for example, methane in the air times their global warming potential. What I want to establish here is that from right to left, early initiatives were very local. Countries like Brazil, China, India are saying no, we are only now starting to have our industrial revolutions. We don't want to pay for what you have emitted in the past. So this is the discussion, but a lot of corporations are also in green business because green business brings them money. First and foremost, green business is a good business case. I mean, environmentally friendly products, green innovations, eco-design, it sells. And why does it sell? Because the consumer is demanding it. The consumer is now demanding that companies are becoming more and more environmentally friendly. Where? Eco-advantage are companies like, for example, Nike, who don't mind to put in the extra dollars in order to become green. Eco-lobbyist companies are companies who are actually trying to lobby against anything that is green in terms of regulation.
Everybody knows that the whole catastrophe, like in the Gulf of Mexico, was because the lack of control and the lack of control processes, which occurred because they tried to save money. So in that case, the internal processes were like totally against green because they tried to save money, and for them it was okay to harm the environment.
So it's a full spectrum of things on which you assess a company, and sometimes you do not have all that information available. But the eco-advantage companies will share this with you when you ask for it. And it's completely being provided of energy by 6 windmills, which Nike has bought themselves, operated themselves on their park in order to have wind energy constantly providing their facilities of electricity. Whatever is left, they donate to the community in the surrounding areas. So that's an example. There's a whole business case. They won't invest in 6 windmills just purely because of marketing. It pays off after an X amount of years, of course. Because there is very different ways of calculating this. The one person says, I will only start when I get the raw materials. The other company says, but I will already start with my supplier who's making the raw materials. And the one will say, I don't take into account the emissions or the waste or the environmental impact which my consumer has when it uses my product, whereas others say, well, I have to because it's still my product. Do I have on an overall basis? So not for my 1 pair of shoes, but producing my 1,000,000 pairs of shoes. So if I am producing the shoes, the greenhouse gas emissions and the waste and the wastewater, everything which is a result of my production process is my scope 1 emission. Scope 2 emissions is basically everything which I need to buy in order to produce. So the electricity, my scope 3 is anything else. My scope 3 is my employees' business travel. My scope 3 is my consumers using my products. My scope 3 is the transportation from getting the shoes from China, where they're being produced, to the store in Rotterdam. Scope 3 contains most of the emissions, but also the emissions which are most difficult to establish because you're relying on other parties. You don't own these emissions. And someone else has these emissions as their scope 1. So you want to prevent double counting what they own and operate. They focus on what they purchase, so electricity and water. And a large thing they're focusing on as well is transportation. And that's what I want to dive a little bit deeper into. And in this case, not just any transportation, but cargo transportation. Transportation in the supply chain. Come back to what you were saying about, should we then just not take ownership of that? And Unilever says, no, we want to take ownership of that, but we are not responsible for you or you or you standing in the shower for 10 minutes or 30 minutes or an hour. Two things. One, programs to educate our customers in order to become more environmentally friendly in using our products. Another approach that they're taking is on the design of products. So making more friendly packaging, which can be recycled easier, or making dishwashing power, which can actually do the same on 30 degrees instead of on 60 degrees. Pure at logistics and transportation, it's roughly about 5 to 7. If you look at the example a bit back, 35,000 truck moves. For every one of them, are you gonna assess how full it was, how much fuel they used? If it's only a fraction of your supply chain, I have a baseline number and I want to reduce it. And if you follow the principles of the greenhouse gas protocol, you calculate the emissions every year on the same basis. So you can establish how much you actually reduced. And that's where we are now working to 65,000 tons a year. But I invested so and so much in this renewable energy project, which is actually having a positive impact on the environment. So overall, I'm carbon neutral. This is a whole new game. You can compare it with the stock market. It's about carbon credits. Carbon certificates is worth 0.005 cents, but they go in millions. One trade can be 100,000 certificates. Optimize certain practices in the supply chain, but also the buyer reaching out to the seller, reaching out to the logistics provider to have the whole chain optimized with initiatives like these.
And with the help of UTI.
With the help of UTI, of course. Sustainability and environmental impact has attention on what we call the C-level, so the CEOs, CFOs, you name it. Then it usually finds its way into the strategy and helps the company move up. Incentive environmental-wise to reduce your air freight. I've shown you with a few examples that there is quite some gains to be made in the supply chain when it comes down to emissions, especially in transportation. You know now how to assess it. If you're interested in where you can find emission factors, try to just Google greenhouse gas protocol or try to Google DEFRA, and you will find sets of emission factors per year which you can use.